You're watching 12 WKRC TV, a new generation of news. This is 12 Newsmakers.
Good morning and welcome to Newsmakers. The federal courts appointed an independent monitoring team to oversee the implementation of the landmark Memorandum of Agreement between the United States Department of Justice, the City of Cincinnati, and the Cincinnati Police Department, and the collaborative agreement between the City of Cincinnati, the Cincinnati African American Community, the ACLU, the Fraternal Order of Police. On April 1st, that team, which is headed by Saul Green, a former federal prosecutor based in Detroit, issued its first quarterly report. That report noted certain accomplishments, including the creation of a mental health response team and the creation of a citizens complaint authority, and which is more open to a citizen complaint process. Despite those accomplishments, the report states that, quote, the city and the parties generally have not met the deadlines of either the MOA or the CA. Specifically, the report singles out the lack of progress on community problem-oriented policing, what's called CPOP, the system of mutual accountability and evaluation, bias-free policing, and cites the failure of police leadership, the city manager, and the political leadership to use their authority to implement the agreements. On April 1st, 12 News reporter Frank Graff filed this report about the reaction to the Monitor's report.
Monitor Saul Green says the city has a long way to go to comply with police reforms ordered by the Justice Department and agreed to in the racial profiling settlement.
I hope that they don't attack Green for doing his job, and I hope they look at it as constructive criticism and don't get defensive.
The report criticizes police commanders and city leaders for not showing greater commitment. It says police use of force policies still don't meet Justice Department guidelines, including restrictions on foot pursuits, restraining force, and the use of chemical irritants and beanbag weapons. The report also charges a tracking system to monitor use of force isn't in place, and police training hasn't changed.
And anybody out there with any common sense knows that institutions like the police do not want to change. And so they look for any excuse to either try to get out this collaborative or to stall on it.
Police officials question the findings, saying they've hardly talked to Saul Green or his staff, and reforms are gradually coming.
From reviewing other use of force documents around the country, we believe that we have perhaps the most advanced use of force policy and procedure that there is in the United States of America in reference to domestic policing. And if it's not, we'll improve it. We'll be more than happy to.
In the last 2.5 weeks, all the parties have had an opportunity to review the 119-page report in greater detail. I am joined this morning by Greg Baker, the Executive Manager of Police Relations for the City of Cincinnati. Mr. Baker has worked with the city since 1980 in a wide variety of roles, including the position of Acting Safety Director after April 2001. Greg, welcome to Newsmakers.
Good morning, Dan.
Given the time since April 1 when the report has been issued, what is your perspective? What's the city's perspective on what was said by the Monitor, by Saul Green?
Well, I think for a large part, we're really proud of our accomplishments. The Monitor's report reflects really the progress that we've made over the past year, and it's the first report. The Monitor has actually been on the job a little more than 90 days. It began in December. Report ran through March 5th, so it really reports our first 90 days progress for in regards to implementation of the terms and conditions of the agreement.
It seems like there maybe is a difference in the speed of implementation between these, and we have to keep straight that there are two different reports. There's the Memorandum of Agreement with the Justice Department, and there's the Collaborative Agreement. Most people wrap them all into one, and they're really two different ones, right?
You're exactly right. And the speed of the agreement in regards to that, we're really proud of our accomplishments in regards to implementing the terms and conditions of the Memorandum of Agreement. The city is in compliance with in compliance or partial compliance with 20 out of the 27 items that the Monitor reviewed. Now, we do acknowledge that progress with the Collaborative Agreement is at a lower rate of compliance, and that's to be expected because of the number of parties that are involved and the complexity of the issues.
Now, with the Memorandum of Agreement area where you say you're in compliance or partial compliance with 20 out of 26, those are more internal issues, right? Things that you have total control of or large control of?
You're exactly right. Pretty much the agreement, or both agreements, can be looked at in three broad categories. Police citizens contacts, and within that is the use of force. CPOP, community problem-oriented policing, which really addresses how we're going to implement the policies. And then the evaluation assessment component, which is the mutual accountability plan. So within the internal part of it, as far as policies and procedures, we're 20 out of 27.
There still is some tension, though, with the monitor about some of those. And Frank's report, and as I read the report, things like use of force policy, the use of how police dogs, how canines are used, how chemical irritants are used to arrest or control people. There are still some areas that are not in total disagreement. Is that right?
Well, in fact, on the use of force policy, that's still a work in progress. We've submitted several drafts of the policy. We're working on one right now. In fact, the policy, or the draft version that we're working on now, is a total rewrite of the use of force policy. We brought in a police expert that has national credentials that worked with us. The police department and law department are in full agreement behind this policy. It was submitted to the Monitor on March 28th, as well as the Department of Justice, and we're continuing to fine-tune it.
Why is that one so hard?
Well, that's at the crux of the issue, is use of force. I mean, that's what we're talking about when we talk about police citizens contacts. That's kind of what got the police to this point as far as the riots that occurred
But aren't
in April.
there best practices situations, other cities that have use of force statements, policies that the Department of Justice has already reviewed, and you could say, gee, we'll look at the ones that work best and just adopt it, a little fine-tuning?
Well, you would think that we'd have that, but the Department of Justice wasn't very forthcoming as far as actually providing us with the information or the details that they wanted until we actually prepared a draft and submitted it to them. Then they reacted to it and told us that that wasn't what they wanted. They wanted to see some things different. You have those kind of national or standards being applied against a local police department that, through the years, through the culture of the police department, people have been trained to certain uses of force, certain definition of force. So we have that kind of systemic change that has to occur as well. And since these things are systemic in nature, they're going to take time to change. So we're talking about changing the training as well as the practice that police officers use here in Cincinnati.
And in fact, that's another thing I pick up from reading the report, that there is the change of policies, but in several cases the Monitor says, but we're not sure whether that's reflected in new training or whether the training has been disseminated to enough officers, so that it's important to note here, it's not just what the policy is, but has the training been implemented?
Well, one thing also to note is that this has only been done in a very few places in this nation. There's few cities that actually have Department of Justice agreements, and no one has a collaborative agreement. Now, as far as when actually approaching this to try to implement those terms and conditions, we believe that in the first year, we put the policies, the written policies in place as far as revising all of incorporating the terms and conditions of the agreement into the policies. Now we're moving into the implementation mode to actually making sure that the policies that have been approved by the chief that are in place are actually being trained and the officers are practicing in those policies. So we've moved beyond just kind of the compliance part into the implementation to make sure that our practices are being, the policies are being practiced.
When we get to that implementation question, given the way you set up the three sort of clusters of issues here, one of the key things is what's called CPOP, Community Problem-Oriented Policing. My understanding, one from reading the report, but also from talking to people, is that really is where the largest areas of disagreement still exist. Is that a fair evaluation?
That's a fair evaluation, because CPOP is where where the rubber meets the road, where we actually look at those citizens police contacts. And of course, we're not at a shortage of viewpoints on how that contact should take place.
Give me a for instance over a substantive dispute about what that should look like?
Okay, let's look at it from extremes. One camp, and I won't specifically say which, but one camp would have police officers really working as social service providers to actually work with individuals that they are encountering and try to refer them to remedial type social service providers. The opposite end of that spectrum would be kind of the you come, we call, lock 'em up perspective, strict law enforcement. So CPOP puts us somewhere in between in that range as far as having police officers work with the citizens, addressing crime and disorder problems, and try to come up with creative techniques to address this crime situation that's occurring in our communities.
So does that ultimately, boiling those two extremes down and saying you have to meet somewhere in the middle, is the issue really who's going to sort of structure the priorities of the police department, whether it's the police make those decisions or some community group is telling the police how to operate?
I think what you've identified is the rub, and where does that take place as far as is it a top-down approach or a bottom-up? I think what we have to do is find what is the comfortable medium there as far as having the community being able to input into police practices as well as having acceptable practices to actually accomplish the goal of the collaborative agreement. It's taking you back to the collaborative agreement. The goal of it is to increase safety, reduce crime and disorder. So that's what we want to keep in our focus on.
Has the withdrawal of the Black United Front as the representatives of the class, has that created a problem? Has that slowed the process, or has it not, because the lawyers involved are the people you're really negotiating with?
Well, it slowed the process a bit when we went through that kind of bump in the road, but I don't think we haven't missed a step. The ACLU has been named by Susan DeLotte, Judge DeLotte, as being the new representatives of the class. We continue to we've worked with them all along, so it's not a new relationship. So I don't think it's really disrupted our progress.
In relationship to not just CPOP, but a larger issue, probably the part of this report that has gotten the most attention, and I'd like to read part of this. These changes will only happen if the police department embraces reforms. We have been told, this is the Monitor speaking, we have been told too often that the police department is implementing CPOP without any reference to collaboration or consultation with the other parties and without reference to requirements of the collaborative agreement. Chief Stryker must put his prestige and authority behind the agreements and empower those within the department who are responsible for implementing them. Similarly, the city manager and the political leadership of the city must hold the chief and his command staff accountable for accomplishing the reforms required by the agreements. That's a pretty strong criticism. What do you say to that?
Well, I think that the city continues to be committed. The city has worked in good faith as far as implementation of those terms and conditions. Again, you know, in the memorandum of agreement, we've either in compliance or partial compliance with 20 out of those 27 items. A fully acknowledged progress within the collaborative agreement is slower, much because of the consensus building decision-making process that we've used, where we felt that we had to be in total agreement as far as process.
Is Chief Stryker somebody who the city manager who you work for, is that something that there has to be pressure on the chief though, and on the command staff?
No, I think the command staff is responding. I think this is just a difficult issue, you know, to talk about how does policing occur in Cincinnati. I mean, this is at the crux of the issue. And certainly we have those two opposite extremes, and we're trying to find where is that happy medium.
One other area, and I only have time for one other area. How does working on this impact the ability of the police to respond to the day-to-day operations, and particularly given the number of murders in the city this year, and has working on this distracted the police from doing their basic work?
Well, it certainly is another huge piece of work that has to be done as far as working on a collaborative agreement. It could be alike to changing the tires on a moving car, because we do have, crime situations almost at epidemic proportions in Cincinnati right now. So it does take away from the time that the command staff has addressing those issues to work on this very important piece of work. So it is kind of a divided approach. I don't think that either one of them is not getting the significant or the appropriate amount of attention, but it certainly is an additional piece of work that has to be addressed.
Okay. Greg, thank you for coming this morning and clarifying some points, and look to have you back, because this is, as you say, this is a 5-year process. This is not a 90 days process.
Yeah, I'll be glad to come back at any time.
Okay, thank you. Stay tuned. After the break, a sharp analysis of the boycott from a new voice.
You actually had a pretty good decade economically here in the Cincinnati area. Your rate of job growth, your rate of income growth was a little bit above the national average. But you're not a leader in the country. You're not anywhere on the same page with the Austins and the Charlottes and the Raleigh Durhams and the like. And they are regions that are organized for collective action, and they are much more equitable regions than is the Cincinnati region. The level of racial segregation, the level of economic segregation here is quite high.
Respected regional expert David Russ set the theme at last Monday's Xavier University Town Hall meeting entitled Cincinnati on the Brink, Race, Regionalism, and Prosperity in the Global Economy. But one of the crispest comments came from the panel of experts from a local person, Eric Ellis, who was sitting next to David Russ. I am now joined by Eric Ellis, the president and CEO of Integrity Development Incorporated. He consults in the area of organizational development and cultural diversity management with corporations and organizations across the United States. Eric, welcome to Newsmakers.
Thank you, Dan.
You and I have known each other for a while, but I don't think you've ever been a guest here.
No, not in some time. I think maybe one time.
Okay, all right. You said on Monday night that Cincinnati's problems around the area of race weren't unique, but we lack perspective about it. What do you mean by that?
What I mean is that I think that we just have not made up our mind that this is something that we want to really address. I think that sometimes, to some extent, in the minority community, we are overly critical of the city of Cincinnati. Cincinnati is a great city. I love Cincinnati. But I just think that all of us have to become more critical thinkers around the issues that we face.
Well, one of the other things you said is that a number of the issues raised by the groups supporting the boycott, that the issues are important. What are some of the issues that you see that are important, that we need to think critically about?
Right. Issues such as economic inclusion, issues around equity and education. I think if you look over the list of, quote, demands that the boycott groups have put together, there is no reasonable thinking person that can disagree with any of the things that they've captured. I think that the issue is, how do we collaborate? And I think that that's where the problem comes, is that as you look at the boycott organizations, I think the three of them, even being able to collaborate with each other has been difficult, and certainly collaborating across boycott groups and other organizations has been a struggle for us.
Where does that lead you at this moment about the viability and wisdom of the boycott?
I'll tell you, as I've looked at Cincinnati, Cincinnati is a wonderfully conservative city, depending on who you're talking to. Some people say that negatively, some people say that's a positive thing. I think that our conservatism almost demanded that we needed something like a boycott to get our attention. I think that at the beginning of the boycott, we felt as a community, many in the establishment, I think, felt that in 2 weeks this thing is going to die, just let it run out of oxygen on its own. And certainly that has not happened. 2 years later, here we are. I believe, though, that the time has come that really we need to look at how do we end the boycott. because I don't believe that the organizations that are leading the boycott are able to resolve it and bring it to a close. Anybody that you talk to offline will tell you things like, what is the end game strategy? And I believe that there are some factions of the boycott that just enjoy, the attention, the fight. If you're not careful, you just get so caught up in the enthusiasm of the fight that you have no desire to bring things to an end. And I think that not bringing it to an end ultimately hurts the constituents that the boycott organizations say that they support. I've heard people say in the past that, this is going to hurt the people, and I didn't really go along with that, but I think that if you have no way of ending it, poor people, young people ultimately don't get what they need out of this community.
Well, one of the question about how to end it, you can't, nobody's just going to walk away. Right. About 10 days ago, Tyrone Yates, who's now in the Ohio House of Representatives but served for many years on City Council, he said that what needed to be done was very specific goals that were measurable, meetable in theory as well as in practice. And those had to be stated, and then we could proceed someplace. But huge, massive global goals like ending economic apartheid are impossible to ever address.
Right.
Would you agree with that, a redefinition of the goals they're limited, or should it just be called off?
I think that there has to be a slight redefinition of the goals, but I think our main problem is that there is no other viable group that has been able to link strategically with the grassroots leadership in our community. Without making that strategic linkage, we leave them to be constituents of the boycott leaders. I think that that's one of the problems that we have in the city of Cincinnati, is that we're not inclusive socioeconomically to get poor people and others, the leadership in those areas, involved in helping us to come up with solutions. So I think as long as the Tyrone Yates and the Eric Ellises and the other people that are involved are in the forefront, and you don't have a good mix across socioeconomic levels, I think that's a problem in and of itself.
Well, how do you do that? I mean, how do you get a leadership that's rooted in the grassroots? I mean, you called for a blue ribbon panel the other night.
Right.
My reaction to that was, isn't that Cincinnati CAN?
Right. And I've been a part of CAN. I love what CAN has done. I think that that's an organization that's going to fit a niche. But I believe that Cincinnati CAN, like many of our other commissions, does not have that representation significantly across socioeconomic stratas. And so I believe that we've got to, there comes a time when you have to pull out all the stops and you have to really get the leadership of Cincinnati engaged in how do we get our best minds thinking about how do we end the boycott.
Who is the leadership of Cincinnati that we ought to be turning to? Name names.
I think that there's no way to ignore the fact that in Cincinnati the business community is a big player. So we have got to have them on the front page of the solution set here. I think one of the points that I don't want to get lost is that it's not just about ending the boycott. I think that goes hand in glove with resolving those issues. But I think many of them are going to have to be resolved by the institutions that have responsibility around those. I think the boycotters, if I'm understanding, they do not want this wish list of someday you'll get this stuff resolved. So their urgency, the reason why they don't want to let it go is they think that if you let the boycott go, we'll never deal with the issues. So I think we have to have some viable strategy that says that we have an action plan, a strategy, and some dollars set aside to really make progress in many of those areas.
Is that problem there, the disconnect, is that the established leadership hasn't demonstrated an urgency about addressing those issues? Is that the perspective?
That's part of it, but I'll tell you, part of it is an issue of respect. One of the things that I think that we don't do well enough in this community is respect each other based on our differences. I think if you look at the boycott, in many respects, there has not been a connection with some of the old guard established leadership in the black community. I think that's terrible. That reminds me, unfortunately, of even the early Clinton days when he went into the White House and he didn't really connect with a lot of the Democratic leadership that had been around for a while. I think that's a mistake. If we're not connecting with Nate Jones and Sheila Adams and some of the others, I think that's not really good. And I think that we have to respect each other across generations and across levels.
Well, Eric, thank you very much. Very direct statements, and that's what I caught my ear the other night, and I appreciate your coming on and talking about this morning.
Thanks for inviting me.
Okay. Thank you for making Newsmakers a part of your Sunday morning. Join us again next week to meet the women and the men shaping our community for the future. Have a good week.